Good morning, everybody. We're just waiting for everybody's sound to connect. Thank you for joining us this morning for our Talking Research webinar. Just bear with me while I let the last couple of people in through the waiting room. So welcome this morning. For those of you who I don't already know, and there's a mixture of faces that I recognise and people who are new to me. My name's Fran Stovald, and I'm the Workforce Development Lead for Sporting Heritage. So I look after all the webinars and the network hangouts and the conference in the autumn, which more news will be coming out of soon. So I will be sort of sat in the background helping Carol run today's session. Just to let you know, we are recording the session, so if you prefer not to be filmed, do by all means switch your cameras off. We're hoping it's going to be a very session full of discussion, and there will be breakout rooms, so we will be asking you to talk quite a lot so that Carol's not doing all the heavy lifting. I think that's all I need to say at the moment. So Carol, I'll hand over to you to get us all started.
Okay, thanks, Fran. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the session. In the spirit of the title of the session, it is Talking Research. So I will do a proportion of talking, but what I'm really hoping this morning is that everybody else, as much as possible, will be able to contribute and put their points of view and talk a bit about the kinds of research activities that you might be involved in around your collection or as aspects of your own research. I hope you've all got a glass of water handy. So I've got a glass of water handy in case my throat gets dry, because hopefully a lot of talking. I'll just take a sip now. Okay, so the first thing to say is I've put my contact email at the top of the chat. So if at any time anybody wants to contact me, particularly in the next couple of weeks further to the session, my email is there. Please do feel free to get into contact with me with any suggestions, comments or queries that you might have as a result of this session, or anything else that pops into your head that might be research related that you think might be of interest to us at Sporting Heritage. The other thing I should ask people to do is, because there's quite a few of us in the room this morning, you don't have to, but if you wanted to put your name and introduce yourself into the chat as well, that might be helpful for other participants. So please feel free to do that. I can see already Anita has already, from Stillwell, England, has already introduced herself in the chat. So if anybody else, thanks for that, Anita. If anyone else wants to do that, then please feel free to do so. Okay, so I should just start. Obviously, you've seen the Eventbrite promotion for this event, so that already gave a little bit of texture about the reason why we're holding this session this morning. Basically, I'm leading the development of research strategy for Sporting Heritage. It's part of a bigger resilience building project that is going on within Sporting Heritage, really to strengthen the organisation to support you people better moving forward, because obviously Sporting Heritage over the last several years, you know, has gained quite a high profile for itself in terms of supporting the sector and sporting collections, helping the preservation, the access of those collections. But one of the things that we think could do with perhaps strengthening and becoming higher in the mix is the research profile, coming from Sporting Heritage itself, but also to help those within the sector to strengthen their research profile. So what do I mean by that? So if we're thinking about strengthening research across the sector, one of the things that needs to happen, we think, is that there should be a broader range of topics and sports represented within that research mix. So we know, for example, that some sports have got a higher profile in research than others do at the moment. That is great. One of the things that Sporting Heritage wants to do going forward is maintain that strength in research where it is happening, to promote that research where it is happening. So for example, I'll take an obvious example. I know there are people here from the National Football Museum this morning. You know, football research is strong. We want that to keep being strong. We want to keep promoting that. There is good partnership work that goes on between Sporting Heritage and the National Football Museum and the National Football Museum and universities. There's an amazing team of researchers at the National Football Museum. So, you know, that kind of momentum, we need to keep that going. But equally, we want to diversify the range of topics and sports that we would like to support in research. And one of the ways that we can get to hear about those sports and those topics is to hold events like this, but to also really invite you and encourage you to have a dialogue with us, to make contact with us, and to talk to us. And that is why the session is called Talking Research, because if there is no dialogue about research, then it is very, very hard to get it going. Okay, because you can be very isolated in the context of doing research, and we recognise that. So that's one of the reasons for, behind developing the strategy. And I suppose the other really important thing about this morning is to identify ways in which we can do that. So that is where you really do come in. From my point of view, I come to this process as somebody with an academic research background. I've worked within sports collections and other collections to do historical research. I've participated in a scoping project with the Hockey Museum in 2016. So I have a bit of insight into the way in which collections work and the ways in which research can enhance collections. But my view is partial. And so I need to hear from people like you, people who are involved directly with collections, really need the evidence to hear about what goes on the ground, what are the challenges, to the research work that you're doing. So that's where we're starting from. And in a moment, I'm going to open the floor and invite people to make some comments, particularly, and I think because we're coming through the pandemic at the moment, that has had an impact on everybody. I think I'm going to ask a big global question, and anybody who'd like to put their hand up and contribute to answer it would be welcome. I suppose the question is, how has your research activity been compromised during this pandemic? Research in the broadest sense. So that's to anybody who'd like to have a go at telling me a bit about that. What's been the impact of the pandemic on any aspect of your research activity? Oh, lots of hands going up. So I think I saw Anita's hand go up first. So you're on mute at the minute, Anita.
Okie doke. Yeah, I'm not a kind of full-time researcher. I'm not connected to a university or anything like that anymore. But my research actually hasn't been impacted particularly by COVID, because all of my research has to happen online anyway. So it hasn't really impacted on it. One thing that does impact on it is not being connected to a university, so not being able to access some of the archives. That's a bit of an issue. But yeah, so I just wanted to say mine hasn't been impacted because I have to be online anyway.
Thanks for that. I think I saw Katie Holmes' hand go up as well. And I know, Katie, you're independent researcher as well. And I'll come to some collections people in a moment, but perhaps you could chip in, because I know you're independent research as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, the same thing as Anita, actually, that I'd chime in with that there is an issue for me around just really knowing how to access sort of academic research, and because I want the work that I do to be informed by academic research, but sometimes feel that it's somewhat inaccessible. But that's something that I'm planning to talk to people about, connect with people like you and find out, what I can do. In a lot of ways, the pandemic has helped me in that I had slightly less work to do, particularly the first half, and so I've had more time to pursue, what's my real passion and interest, which is in women's distance running history. Although it has actually also affected my research, and I was fortunate to get be awarded an independent researcher fellowship from the Women's History Network last year, and that was for expenses for me to go to Edinburgh, Glasgow and Paisley to research Dale Gregg, the British marathon runner who set a world best time in 1964. So, you know, that was all meant to happen last year, and that would be the first time that I've ever visited an archive and done that kind of research. So I'm looking forward to picking that up at some point, perhaps this year.
Okay, thanks for that, Katie. I mean, that's quite useful, because I suppose it goes without saying, because of the closure of museums, of archives, of libraries, it does almost go without saying, isn't it? That's one of the profound impacts of the pandemic, that external researchers necessarily haven't been able to get into the collections to do the research. But I'm wondering if there's people from within collections now. Obviously, that's an impact of the pandemic from a public use point of view. But I'm just wondering whether people who are working within collections, has the pandemic perhaps opened up an opportunity for yourselves as the curators, the collections managers, to actually do subject-specific research, as opposed to your day-to-day functional research that you might do in the archive? Does that make sense? Could anybody comment on that from collections?
Hi, David Allen, the Harts Museum. One of the things I've done during the pandemic is we've got 11,000 pages of Harts minute books. And what I've done is I've actually chunked them up into the date order of the minute book. So now you can actually go to a specific date of a minute book and look at the information there. And the sort of thing that's in the minute books is it will give you the team selections for the first team and the second team in some years, right? Some years it doesn't, but it gives you things like the gate receipts. So the actual pandemic has given an opportunity to actually do something that, because I was at home doing it, that, you know, that's been really useful. So I'm going through the minute books sort of meeting by meeting, and part of that thing I've discovered 4 Hearts games didn't know anything about. So there's a line in the minute book, and there wasn't one in any of the, you know, the club historian or the club statistician had. And then using that information, be able to go to the newspaper archive and search for specific games. The one very interesting one I discovered is a women's football one. There was a women's football match was advertised to be played at Tynecastle Park, the home of Hearts, in 1896. So there's an advert on the day of the match. Can't find any result of the thing, right? There's absolutely no mention of the game. You know, so there's an advert on the Monday saying the game's going to be played in the evening. No newspapers give the result. So it's one of those things. Was the game played? Because they played a game the following. They played a game on the Tuesday, which has got reports about it, but nothing on the game played at Tynecastle. And also that's covered in the minute books, and there's nothing in the minute books about the game getting played at Tynecastle either.
So basically, David, what this is giving you the opportunity to do is do that deep dive kind of research that perhaps you might not have had an opportunity to do. Yes. Can anyone else speak to that kind of experience? Or, you know, does anyone want to speak more to the ways in which the pandemic have really undermined the process of research for you, either in a functional day-to-day capacity or, you know, through, you know, other commitments that has meant that you can't do research as part of your role in?
Ian, do you want to go next? I know you had your voice.
Yeah, so the pandemic has impacted in threefold for me. I'm currently in the process of writing a book about a Bristol Rovers footballer from the 1950s and 60s. And what it's meant is that haven't been able to get to the Central Library in Bristol to look at the newspaper collection. Haven't been able to get into Bristol Archives office, and haven't even been able to order from them. There's a couple of photographs they've got that are relevant, and I made inquiries, and because the office is closed, they can't even supply me with copies of the, I'm closed to the public, but they can't even supply me with copies of photographs. It's a bit disappointing, but I'm sure there are good reasons for that. And then thirdly, I've been talking to via Zoom or telephone, mostly telephone, because of the age of the people I've been speaking to, who have personal experience of the footballer Alfie Biggs. And whilst the phone is obviously a useful way to speak to them, there's not, for me, there's nothing quite like talking face to face with an individual when you're trying to elicit information, and just the flow of the conversation I find is much better face to face rather than over the telephone. So yeah, those are my experiences or limitations of research during the pandemic.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks for the sort of the way you structured that into three parts that have been impacted for you. But I think the thing about having the dialogue with people and having the face-to-face interaction is really critical. And I think everybody is missing that. And I think particularly for research. And I will say, actually, as somebody who's been working, trying to work on development of the research strategy, actually, I found that really challenging myself, because you're working isolated. And actually, for research, you need to talk. And you need to be able to bounce off ideas with other people, I think, in order to get, to help your thought processes as much as anything else. I'm mindful that, Wicca was wanting to make a comment. I think your National Football Museum, perhaps we'll take your comment as the last one before we move on to a poll that we've got ready for you.
Yes, well, I just wanted to say quickly that most of our team was furloughed for 7 months, a full-time furlough. So our research has been very severely impacted because we just haven't had capacity to do any research. We've had no or very little access to our stores, so the collection's been not very accessible. Once curators came back from furlough, the whole team got part-time furloughed. So again, capacity issues. So we're just really, at the minute, we're all back full time now. So we are just about finding our feet again, but we're all gearing up towards reopening now. So again, it's going to be a while off, I think, till we can really delve into research again and open our research centre again as well.
I think the thing is, we've got a lot of people in the room today with obviously very, very diverse and different experiences. And this is one of the things that I think in research strategy we've got to really try hard to make sense of, and to be able to speak to the range of experiences, sizes of people are managing different sizes of collections. National Football Museum, huge collection, members of staff, volunteers, and right down to people who are perhaps almost self-managing a collection. So, we're talking to a very wide constituency here in terms of research. And really trying to build an understanding of that is challenging, but we are trying to do it. And that is what part of the session is about today. So I suppose one of the things I'm thinking about the pandemic, and it actually goes with the previous comments really, is that is going to have an impact, I'm assuming, going forward, because all the time that we've lost, we can't get back. So we're going to be trying to gain ground, and we're going to be trying to get back up to pace again. So I'm just wondering, Fran, if we could just put up the first poll, which asks a question about generally and in.
I'll just launch the poll now, and then do you want to talk people through it?
Yeah, I'll talk you through it when the questions come up.
I think somebody's just knocked on my door, so I'm going to disappear for 2 minutes while you talk through the poll.
Okay, so this is just a short poll, and I do realise polls are a very blunt instrument here. So just generally, and thinking post-pandemic, which aspect of research do you see as most challenging in your role, or perhaps within your organisation? Let's say if you're sitting in a big collection situation like the National Football Museum, for example. So generally, which aspect of the research you see as most challenging? Is it the functional research which I would interpret as your day-to-day research that goes on around your routine tasks with the management of collections? Is it subject research, which is that deeper dive and building that contextual knowledge and learning that might help to enhance understanding of your collections? Or is the challenge operational research? And anybody who was in the session with Sonia Raspberry recently, when I'm thinking about operational research, I'm thinking about things like evaluation of projects and exhibitions, which is a form of research, or perhaps looking at research that might go with things like audience engagement. So if you had to sort of say which of those three things would be the most challenging moving forward, which would that be? I need to answer it as well, don't I? I'm going to say subject research.
Right, so we've had 18 people vote in our poll. If anybody would like to cast their final vote, now is the time to do it. Right, would you like me to share the poll results, Carol, so you can see where it all lies? This is the exciting bit, isn't it? Right, let me just share the results. Can everybody see that? Oh, you're on mute, Carol.
Oh, I'm sitting here saying interesting. This is really interesting. So I'm just going to leave that up on the screen for a moment. So anybody who answers subject research, can you just throw your idea into the ring here and just tell me why that is? Why is subject research so challenging, or potentially the most challenging? Preferably someone from collections might, I'm assuming people who are working within collections might say that. Just moving that to the side. Any takers?
There were 13 people who said subject research, so.
I'm not collections, but just to throw something in there is that subject research, well, all of them actually are important, but subject research in terms of Stawball is always difficult because there just isn't a lot out there. So that's why I put subject research, because that's where I'm usually looking for historical stuff.
Okay, thanks, Anita.
And just picking up on what you said, Anita, just knowing a little bit about how your collection's stored, is it also accessing some of your collection materials? I know some of your collection material is held within other organisations that you don't naturally have access to. Is that an issue as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Our we do, in Stawball England, we're a volunteer-led national governing body, and we don't have premises, so it's all our own homes. So most of our archive is held in our president's home, and most of it belongs to them. But also it's the local Sussex Archaeological Society. They have some of the Stawball records. That's quite difficult to get into. Obviously now it is, but even when it, pre COVID, excuse me, and also the Keep, the East Sussex Record Office and West Sussex Record Office. So it's spread everywhere, and the rest of it is under people's beds, in people's cupboards, and in their loft. So it's completely different, inaccessible to a lot of us to research those things. And because it's such an ancient sport and a rural village labourers sport, there's not much documented apart from what we already know, but I would love to find out more.
So I wonder how many other people are in a similar situation from a subject research point of view, where the collection that you're trying to access is actually geographically scattered, and that's a barrier or a challenge going forwards. A few nods.
But I'm thinking within collections itself, because obviously functional research, if you're working within collections, it's part of your day-to-day tasks and activities. But I'm wondering in terms of whether or not in collections management, if you're in a position where you're managing collections, you're curating collections, whether or not there is truly time within your workload to dedicate to the wider sort of topical and subject research that you might feel that you need to do in order to add further texture to your own understanding and perhaps even the public's understanding of your holdings or particular items, let's say, or artifacts within your collection. You know, is there actually the time allowed within the collection manager role and the curator's role to actually do that more deep subject research? That would, you know, that would be my question to people who work within collections. Jamie? Can you unmute Jamie, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my experience in the pandemic has actually benefited me. I actually retired February just before it hit, and was thinking I was going to be doing all sorts of things, but haven't. So I've spent a lot of time scanning things from my own collection, the last few bits, but also because I'm the webmaster, people have been emailing me all sorts of stuff, and I think people have had more time to do it for obvious reasons. So when people used to email me stuff, it may be weeks before I got it on the site. Now I generally start the day they email it, and keep up to date with it. I can have, say, 300-400 items been emailed to me, and obviously normally it took ages to get it on the site. Now, within a couple of days, they're usually up. So actually for our Bristol Rovers history group, it has benefited us. And people have brought around their own collections to my house, socially distanced, for me to scan when they haven't got a scanner. So yeah, you know, I've then left it for a couple of weeks to make sure it's all safe and then started scanning it. So it's we've got a vast amount on there now that we wouldn't have if it wasn't for the pandemic. I still wish it would go away though.
Well, yeah, but it's interesting. Again, I mean, this is a can of worms, isn't it, really? Because, you know, what we're hitting on now is a distinction between what we might call, you know, collections that are becoming digitized and collections that are physical collections that, you know, that the public might want to access, that public researchers might want to access, but also that curators and managers and their teams need to access in order to do that functional research task, but also to perhaps get the depth in subject research as well. So it isn't you know, it's not an easy kind of dynamic to be navigating through the pandemic, but clearly not just through the pandemic, but moving forward, you know, I am quite interested in this response, and I know that there's only, you know, there's not a huge amount of us in the room, although it feels like there is. You know, that quite a high proportion of people have said subject research is potentially the challenging thing going forward, is something that I can't really explore any further at the moment here, but certainly if people want to feed into the chat at the end of the session or to talk a bit more about that individually, I'd be really happy to hear about that, because obviously with an academic's hat on, that subject research is really quite a critical element of how we might understand contextual research and the importance of contextual research to add value to existing collections. Okay, Fran, have we got another poll?
We do. Let me just stop sharing that one.
I've lost my other. Oh, there it is.
Oh. Right. So would you like me to launch the second poll?
Yes, please.
Okay. Right, are there any final votes going in? We've had 18, 90, 19 out of 20 voted. Ah, full house, 20 out of 20. Right, shall I end it there? Would you like me to share the results, Carol?
Yes, please. Yeah. Okay.
And I think that picks up on something that Andy Rackley had put in the chat, that even when you're working with a collection, I'm sure Vivica would say the same at the Football Museum, and my experience of being in a collection, the time that you have when you're managing a collection to research is minimal, unless you've got a real reason to be getting on with it. So I'm not surprised that people said not enough time.
Yeah, you know, put my academics hat on again. You know, if I ran this same poll across, you know, HE, higher education academics, I would lay money on it that the number one thing would be not enough time. And I suppose, you know, again, that might go back to how the role of particular collections managers and people holding the collections, you know, how the role is seen in terms of, you know, the real bread and butter of the job, and is about that functional research, you know, the preservation and of collections, access, you know, categorising collections, descriptions, doing research for descriptions of collections, research that might be undertaken to produce exhibitions, but actually perhaps that wider, and perhaps also from a personal interest point of view, if you're a collections holder or you work within a collection, you know, that you might have wider interests to develop within your holdings, that you just simply don't have time to do it because it doesn't sit comfortably in the pecking order of everything else that you might have to do within that role. I mean, one of the things that's become clear to me the more I've been looking into developing the research strategy, because I came at this as an academic, I didn't really understand just how much is involved in the role of a collections manager and a curator, just how many different hats you're wearing and the different roles and tasks that you have to do, and actually very, very many of them research-based, and research-based at various levels as well. Which, you know, so when we talk about research, it's a massive catch-all, but there are many layers of the types of research that might go on, as I understand it, within the context of collections delivery, let's say, and the different aspects of use of those collections as well. You know, from building the descriptions around artifacts and primary sources, to generating exhibitions and the research for that, and perhaps you know, some people within the team producing educational resources, which takes research as well. So the roles are definitely huge in terms of managing what we mean by research. Okay, so that's useful to me going forward. Does anybody want to speak to any of those particular issues specifically? Let's leave not enough time. Does anybody want to? People who said other. What would the other things be that might be a hindrance in terms of progressing research projects in the role? There might have only been one. Any?
I put other in. The one thing I know that the Edinburgh Evening News has got bound volumes of all the Saturday sports editions of the Pink News.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually purchased 5 bound volumes from the 20s and 30s of the another Saturday paper from Edinburgh. And those are invaluable for doing detailed research into football, because the final edition on the Saturday evening has got the full lineup and match reports for football games, but not just football, for rugby, hockey, whatever, right? And one thing that'd be great would be actually to get into the Evening News bound volumes and actually assist to digitise those. Because there's lots of things. I'm working on reserve teams at the moment, and they stopped getting listed in the minute books. And I know that the bound volumes of the Saturday papers have got the lineups for reserve games. But not just football, but for all sorts of sports in the Edinburgh area or Scotland. So being able to get down there and actually start to digitise those and make that resource available, not just from a Hearts context, but from a Scottish sporting context, would be something really useful to do.
Yeah, so it's a physical access issue, really. Can I just pick up on one other result before we move on in here, which is about the lack of access to current research? Would anyone like to elaborate on that as a challenge? Yeah, you've got Sue there, but I don't think it's is that it's Kev, isn't it? Can you unmute, Kev? Can you unmute? Okay, you with us?
Okay, yes. Sorry about that. Yes, I highlighted the lack of access to current research, but that went hand in hand with as well. I'm an independent researcher. I'm based in the south of France, and so my work is heavily dependent online, as you can imagine. The pandemic has stopped me from traveling to the UK. I'm extremely frustrated at this moment in time that I can't get access to any of the archives that I want to at this particular moment in time. But from the online research, the money issues for me, I subscribe to the National Newspaper Archives. That cost me £80. I'm a retired school teacher. I go on to Ancestry, which is another £14 a month. And only last week, I wanted to read an article by Graham Curry on football in the capital. So I went on Taylor and Francis online, and I went through the process of downloading it, and they wanted €50 from me. I can't do it. I just cannot access these research. The background reading in this respect is absolutely essential for me, but I'm absolutely stymied with it. So to me, the lack of access to the research and the money go hand in hand.
Okay, thanks. That's a useful comment, actually, because I want to kind of get a feel for this in terms of collections as well, because, you know, my understanding of it is just because you work within a collections context, as you know, whether you're the National Football Museum or whether you're a smaller collection, I think I'm right in saying that access to academic databases and academic research isn't possible. Can people give me some insight there who work within sport collections, curators or collections managers? Yeah, Thanks.
Some institutional subscriptions to a couple of newspaper archives, but it is a budget question, no doubt, and that's only been recently added to the budget. We've not had a budget before. So yeah, we sometimes, our curators then have a personal, if they do their own independent research as well, they might have their own personal access, but that's obviously the wrong way around. It should be institutional, but we don't always have the budget.
No, thanks for that. Really, you're kind of confirming something that I know, but also that goes back to that whole thing about subject research. You know, if you want up-to-date information and current research to try and contextualise aspects of your collection, and also to broaden your own personal knowledge and understanding of the collections you're working with, then that's critical for your research. And I would say that going forward, that is something that I don't know how we take that on, but it is something that to me seems to need taking on, because it's a kind of privilege of academic institutions and universities at the moment to be able to access current research. But quite often the current research that they're doing is leaning on the collections that you people are processing and looking after. So I think that's quite a big issue in terms of research for the collections holders. Does anyone else with collections want to add comment there in terms of access to current research or academic research, how that might benefit them, or, you know, in future? Or equally, if you just want to put comments into the chat, that would be really helpful there. Okay, so I think what we'll do now is we'll move on to thinking a bit about partnership working, which kind of sits a little bit with the idea of perhaps how your subject research could potentially be enhanced by partnership working, looking ahead, looking beyond the pandemic perhaps. Okay, so I'm just wondering, did anybody last week, there's been a lot of online conferences lately, did anybody go to the Culture Reimagined online conference last week? Have I got anybody in the room who went to that? Okay, so basically the Culture Reimagined conference last week, it was really about championing digital initiatives, interactive technologies, and to enhance the museum experience, really. But something that kept coming out during the discussions during the course of the day was the benefits of partnership working with universities in particular. That was raised several times during the day. And so I'm just wondering whether or not there are people, particularly again collections managers in the room, who might want to comment on the potential value of partnership working with universities. And so with that in mind, I've got another poll for you that we can then perhaps build some discussion from. So Fran, can we have the third poll, please, in relation to partnership working with universities?
Right, so hopefully everybody should be able to see that third poll.
So it's thinking about university research and development partnership working. So research and development could, you know, it could mean partnering with a university to really do practically anything within your institution, within your collections, of course, but perhaps more traditionally, we might think about the research relationship as one which actually accesses the collections and might use that research to help, you know, contextualize what your holdings are about, to help develop exhibitions, to help develop outputs in the form of publications, blogs, social media. So, you know, broad brushstroke there. So thinking about that partnership working, which of the following best applies to your museum, archive or collection?
Is there anybody else who'd like to cast a vote in that poll?
How many have we got, Fran?
We've got 13.
13. Okay, so that might be, I'm thinking there that people perhaps who are independent researchers might not have
be
inputted
applicable.
into that poll. Okay, so
Would you like me to share the results?
Yes, please. Okay. So just give me a tick while I digest these. Okay. So without, and I don't mean this in an offensive way, okay. What I'm looking at here are the outliers, and that's the outlier, and the outliers here are in question 1 and in option 1 and in option 5. Okay, so the people that I'd quite like to hear from, if you'd like to contribute, is the people. We meet research requirements by covering what's needed in-house. And maybe you could say a bit more about that. Is that because of the size of your collection or another reason? So would anyone like to speak to that, who answered that way? We meet research requirements by covering what's required, what's needed in-house. Yes, Jamie.
Yeah, I mean, we are only quite small. I personally, I've never thought about contacting a university anyway. And really, we've only started a year and a half ago. So it's purely by putting things on Facebook and asking people to send things in that we've done it. So in-house, but with other fans. But certainly universities are never thought of that before. Yeah.
Is it something you would think perhaps in the future you might consider, just out of interest?
Well, yeah, possibly. No idea how to, but yeah.
Okay, so that sits, doesn't it, down with that last one? Ah, so yeah. Is it Alan?
Davey.
Sorry, Davey.
I actually put both outlier box ticks both right. So in-house in terms of hearts, the club historian, the club statistician, David Speed and Bill Smith, they've been doing research for 80 years between them. They've been doing it since the 1980s. I started doing it in 1997. So in terms of hearts, we would say the expertise is in-house specific for that. But the reason I put wanting to get involved in universities is from a more academic point of view. So doing, like, say, non-hearts type research, allowing university to access things like the minute books and the wages books and things, because somebody wanted to do, say a research project on tying up the wages books to the gate income, say. So a more academic viewpoint of football rather than us doing like who scored a goal in the match in 1914 or whatever, right? You know. So some academic thing to actually use the information we've got from an academic point of view rather than just a purely who played in the game and who scored the goals, that type of thing.
Yeah, so
you're on mute. Can't hear you.
I'm thinking about those outliers. You know, we would like to work with a university partner, but not sure how to best to initiate contact. That's fairly important information for us to know, because that's something that, you know, looking forward, something that we'll be working on in the context of the development of the research strategy is trying to strengthen our networks within universities as sporting heritage. We've already got good academic networks, but I think it's as well sort of raising awareness, you know, with more academics, that sports collections are there to be used, and there are potentially people within those collections who would really like to have that input and support. But obviously, you know, that that's got to be something that's negotiated. And sporting heritage, we think that we could be a bit of a pivot there from that point of view. So that's something that we're thinking about, trying to help people with, supporting the initiation of contacts where that is appropriate. And so we could be, you know, we can be a person to help facilitate that. But I'm just wondering, people who are already working with university partners, I can see, you know, people don't know how to initiate, people who cover their needs in-house. Is there anybody who's using university partners at the moment who'd like to say why they think it's a benefit to do that? I could say it because I'm an academic, I come from that background, but it would be good to hear from collections who are using university partnerships to tell us a bit about why they think and how that's beneficial. So, anybody?
Stuart, you've got your hand up, and also then if we come to you first, and then Richard will come to you.
Oh, yeah, we're obviously in a fortunate position. We've got a new stadium being built in Birmingham, and part of that development is the possibility of an athletics museum. So we're at the very bottom end of things, and the university, Birmingham City University, are moving into the stadium as well. So we're talking to them about how we start working together, so that when we open up the museum on the campus, how we work with the university on things like research and involving schools, and how we support things like the physical education curriculum, all sorts of things like that. That's where we are at the moment.
So from your point of view, then, is that something that the benefit of that relationship, has that surprised you about in relation to the additional texture that's been able to bring, you know, to the table? Do you think, you know, has it given you new insights, do you think, or will it give you new insights moving forward?
Yes, I mean, we've put together a business plan and so on. It's how you make the museum viable. So if you can make it attractive to more than just people who just come and have a half an hour walking around a room with some old artifacts, how you make it relevant to people who want to do research at one end, or just children coming in to find out about the sport and raise awareness and all those sort of things. It's quite a broad spectrum, isn't it?
Yeah. What about funding in terms of, does anyone think that one of the big benefits of partnering with universities is access to funding? Would anyone have a view on that?
While everybody's thinking about that, Richard, I know you've had your hand up for a while. Do you want to come in while everybody's thinking about Carol's question?
Yeah, well, there's lots going through my head at the moment because there's all sorts of things cropped up as we've been talking. But going back to Jamie from the Bristol Rovers History Group, very correct in him saying, you know, we're in our infancy, not thought about it. But certainly, Fran and others will know of Exeter City, for example, in establishing their museum, getting funding, etc., etc., etc. Worked very, very closely with Exeter University, and the benefits were massive. And certainly the Bristol Rovers stuff that they've got, for example, the historical context is lacking a little bit sometimes, and work from university partners, etc., could actually enhance and improve. And again, I just think it is a very, very good way forward. And people have mentioned educational things, people have mentioned the dementia projects that we're talking about. And again, we have people within the academic institutions that could work in partnership and improve in a lot of these aspects that people are mentioning this morning. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Richard.
I think coming on to that, we set the museum up 5 years ago, and we knew all about the history of the football club, but knew bugger all about setting museums up. And we employed a professional museum curator who knew nothing about football. And it was a really good partnership because she was challenging us on what's the story. So it was all about story. So unless your objects are telling a story, it's just a random thing put in a case. And it was a really good partnership between us as, you know, Hearts fans who knew everything about Hearts, but somebody knew everything about setting a museum up to actually tell a story. And I think that was a really good partnership. So it wasn't academic as such, but it was actually employing somebody who knew everything about setting the museum up.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. It's the same kind of principle, isn't it? And again, it goes back, goes back to talking and dialogue, because if you've got, more heads thinking about how you might go around things, more heads, more hands, enables you to do that research, enables you to think through that research, enables you to think through that process of research, what works, what doesn't, what might work, and to throw those ideas around, but also to get the practical process going on the ground as well. That's got to be better than, trying to just do everything internally, arguably. And, the university partnerships can be very valuable from that point of view. But again, I asked that question about funding. Does anyone who's in collections, just before we move on to the final section of the session, has anyone got any view on how the funding aspect of university partnerships is beneficial?
There have been a couple of interesting comments in the chat, refunding. I think Andy's put in that actually sometimes if you need to, well, actually, Andy, rather than me explain your point, do you want to explain your point that you put in about accessing support from the university? I assume that's is that Sterling that you're referring to?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm working at the Warrington Wolves rugby stadium, and as a volunteer, and my first project was to look at making the stadium a dementia-friendly stadium. And I discovered that Stirling University had completed a lot of work and provide a lot of support for people with an accredited system. And a local Warrington leisure centre was built that's been completely dementia friendly, and that was supported by Stirling. So I approached Stirling to see if they would come and help me with an audit and the accreditation, but we were looking at £5,000 plus to do that, of which we're a charitable foundation. We sit separate to the actual rugby club. We're a charitable foundation, so £5,000 to come along and work towards accreditation is a lot of charitable resources. And that project, with the focus on memory, underpins a lot of the work that we do here, but it obviously is done nationally, and is more paramount now. So that also fits in with the work that I'm doing at the moment during lockdown, which is the collections here, as you can probably see behind me, the collections here at the stadium, of which I've had a lot of time to come in and help sort things out. And the purpose of that is to get people who are living with dementia to come along and to look at the collections and to sit and reminisce. So lots of projects are linking together with the underpinning theme of memory. So the accreditation would be fantastic, but we just don't have the £5,000 to pay Stirling University and then to find the money with the stadium to then make any changes that are required. It's kind of on hold.
Yeah, so that's interesting from a funding point of view, because of course sporting heritage, one of the things that it potentially can help people with is funding, and obviously we've got Joe Baldman who's doing that, and I don't know if you've had any contact with Joe at all, Angie. If you haven't, it might be worth contacting Joe Baldman about potential access to funding, but particularly external pots that you get through. You'll know about the the lottery monies and heritage funds.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of money if you're thinking about those kinds of projects. But also in terms of just going back to university partnerships as well, you know, they are worth exploring, because there are universities now who are taking a huge interest in, as you know, dementia research, and particularly applied research in terms of, you know, Sporting Memories has been a huge success, and the evaluation of the impact of that kind of work. So universities are interested in that kind of work. But again, it goes back to that question. And I know when people are sitting in collections and you're out in satellite areas, making those connections with universities can be incredibly challenging. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to look at. Sporting Heritage wants to and needs to look at how we can facilitate not just the big players in Sporting Heritage, because there are some big players in Sporting Heritage, but also to diversify a bit and try and help, you know, the satellite kind of collections as well. You know, I'm not saying it will be possible to do that, but we definitely need to try and have a look at it, you know, and see how we can facilitate and get dialogue going to support people better across the sector and make the sector stronger.
I mean, through Sporting Heritage, we are putting in a bid today from a different direction, but with a particular. You asked about the focus on university, so I do need to do some more research on that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, perhaps we should have a conversation about that. You know, offline. Perhaps we should have a chat about that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Angie. So I think now we're winding into. Oh, Fran, are we a bit over time? No, we might need to go into our. Are we okay? I think we might need to move off from that. I suppose my parting shot on that will be, in terms of university partnerships, one of the things that Sporting Heritage has done, and some people in the room are already aware of it, is that they have been involved in the programme of Arts and Humanities Research Council funded PhDs. That's been a significant programme that's been overseen by Sporting Heritage. And we've just had the last tranche of those PhD projects come through in 2019. So we are looking again at potentially applying for that funding if the call hasn't gone out yet for a further round of funding. But Sporting Heritage, we will work towards applying for another tranche of those collaborative PhDs that puts research students into collections for partnership working. So, you know, if nothing else, it's worth staying connected to Sporting Heritage, because, you know, those kinds of opportunities, they are gold dust. They are gold dust in terms of, if you get a funded PhD student to work within your collection, that can be a very beneficial thing in terms of funding, but also in terms of the subject research that a student can help you with. So we're going to have our fingers crossed moving forward that another call for that funding will go out, and it is something that we'll be looking towards. Okay, breakout rooms, Fran. We're going to think a bit now about untapped research potential, because that was a major aim of today's session. So what we're looking to do now is to go into breakout rooms, and a little bit of blue skies thinking here. But it could be real blue skies thinking, actually. What I'd like you to do in the groups is share an existing aspect of untapped research potential that you think exists within your collections. So within your group, share an example of untapped research potential that exists within your collection, and that can be a big idea or it can be a small idea. Okay. And if you could think about why that's important, why you think it's important now for that research to happen. What would you need to progress that research? And what resources might Sporting Heritage provide to support that idea? Okay. So your big or small research idea, untapped research in your collection. why it's important, what would you need to progress it, do you think, and what resource or resources might Sporting Heritage be able to provide to support you to make your research happen. Okay, so we're going to go into breakout rooms for 15 minutes there, and suggesting that perhaps if you're an independent researcher and so you're not in charge of a collection, perhaps you might, if you're in a group, perhaps you might scribe and take a few notes down so you can put that into the chat for us at the end. That would be really, really helpful. So, yeah.
Right, shall I dispatch everybody?
Please, yeah.
I'm sure many of you have been in breakout rooms before, but if you haven't, as I open up the rooms, you'll get an invite that will pop up on your screen. If you just click on it, and it will whisk you away into your breakout rooms. We have 5 rooms of 4 people. Carol, it will actually allot you a breakout room, so it's up to you whether you want to join your room or whether you'd like to stay in the main space with me. So
it depends if they let me in.
Well, I'll leave that up to the group. I'm going to open the rooms now, so you should get an invite popping up onto your screen. Right, so I hope you had productive discussions. I'm just going to step in and do a little quick bit of facilitation to give Carol a little bit of a break. So we had 5 rooms, and I'm very conscious that we're almost at the end of the session. So if we could have one example from each group. So I'm going to go round each group. I'm going to, rather than just picking on somebody, I will list the names are in that group, and then you can, whoever would like to step forward can step forward and feedback. So in group number 1, we had Anita, Liz, Richard and Kev. Who would like to feedback an example from your group about untapped research? Go on, Anita. Yeah, do you want to jump in?
Shall I? Because we had 2 independent researchers and, well, including myself in that, although I'm not really, and 2 football clubs with Bristol Rovers and Ipswich Town history groups, and both saying this pretty much the same things. They have a huge amount of research material, memorabilia and history, but it's the link as to the, so that's what it was. They've got the what it is, it's the why it is, and the meaning that could be brought out of that in terms of wider historical importance. They were both saying that these sessions are a huge help in networking and finding out things, and they could see how a link with universities would be able to bring out the why and the meaning of what they've got.
Yeah, lovely, thank you very much. Right, moving on to group 2. So this group had Andrea, Andy R, Ian and James B in. If somebody from your group would like to feedback.
Yeah, shall I speak for the group?
Yes, do jump in.
Okay, right, very quickly then. None of us held collections. We're researchers as such. 2 interesting topics we spoke about. One was a collection in private hands, which basically records all of the teams of Bristol Rovers, ranging from the first team down to the youth team. But the interesting point for me about that, which is an untapped sort of research, is that every again, this is from the 1940s through to the 1970s, pretty much, records the attendance, but also how much people were paying to attend the game, and it breaks it down into the terraces, the stands, the juveniles. I just think there's some really interesting research potential there for looking at how much it was costing to watch this particular football team, and whether people's habits changed as they become a bit more affluent. Were they moving from the terraces and onto the stands? So that was one aspect. And then the second was an interesting concept from James Brown, who's researching the French football team of the 1930s World Cup. Very restricted. He lives in France. The World Cup finals were played in, I can't remember, is it Uruguay or Argentina? Anyway, South America, unable to get there currently. But has made offers of perhaps research students wanting to add credits to their degrees by carrying out research for him in those countries regarding the Football World Cup.
Lovely, thank you. I should say, as you're feeding back, if you could, so those who've heard of already, so Ian and Anita, if you could summarize really quickly and add some points into the chat thread, just so that we can capture that as well. And anybody else from within your groups where there's points that we've not managed to cover in this feedback, it'd be really great if we can capture that in the chat thread. So moving on to group 3. So this group had Angie, Brian, Davey and Headley in. Who would like to feedback on your behalf?
Shall I do it?
Yes, that'd be great.
I think the points of the first feedback are reflected in ours. It's not about the collections themselves, it's the why behind the collections. And the collections we feel were about inspiring, informing, engaging, motivating people. So the purpose of them. There's things out there that really can inspire people, and one of the group mentioned an archive of existing newspapers that people didn't know about, that's really added something to the research itself. So basically it's finding the story behind the objects. One person thought that it'd be great to have a database, a national database of some kind of every football player, every rugby player, every sporting person and their history. That would then stop having to research, everybody research the same things, would be a great outcome. Also, people are a great untapped resource to give their memories and the feedback from their, as again, back to dementia and the ability to talk about your long-term memories. It all comes to why collect. And then what can Sporting Heritage do to help? Somebody suggested that rather than everybody pay a subscription fee to some of the archiving centres, that maybe through Sporting Heritage we could have joint memberships. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything else to that.
No, thank you, Angie. That's really
I haven't got time to type that now.
Don't worry, that's fine. I know with other sporting, with other subject specialist networks that I've been involved in, they have gone down that route of having a global membership to various archive services, and some have worked well and others have been massively underused, and then that service has disappeared. So it works both ways, but I think if there was a way, that might be worth something that Carol could take on and explore. I'm very conscious of the time, so I'm going to move on to group 4. So this had Jamie H, Katie, Stuart and Vidka in. If somebody could feedback from your group.
Yeah, I don't mind. Very quickly, we talked about Rovers were trying to start of either video or oral chats with older fans to get their memories. We think that's quite important, and we've lost a few recently, and we've realised all the knowledge they've got and all the memories they've got are gone. So we're hoping to try and start doing something like that, although might have to wait a few months yet. That was very quickly summed up.
Lovely. Is there anybody else from that group who would like to add anything else in? But thank you, Jamie. Okay, I will move on to group 5. So last but by no means least, this was the group that had Andy M, Bill, Helena and Nick in. If somebody could feedback on your behalf, please.
I'll do it. So we talked about women's football particularly, because I've just joined the Welsh Football Museum, which is yet to exist, and identified that there's probably quite a big gap in the collection for women's football. And then straight away heard from Helena, who is doing independent research on Irish football, and she tells me about a book that's been written about Welsh football, women's football, which was great, which I didn't know. We also heard a bit from Andy, who did research and had similar struggles in Scottish football as well. So straight away, similar ideas from the kind of regions, which is great. And then also we talked a bit about Eddie Paris, who's first sort of recently identified as the first black Welsh footballer, from Bill, who's written a book on black footballers at the 92 clubs, and also the struggles he's had in kind of getting the Welsh FA to engage with that. So again, that's something that hopefully I can help with. So yeah, so we did a bit of women's football, a bit of and black footballers, and obviously importance to us and museums is having that kind of diversity in the museum and the collection that we definitely hope to kind of represent. So yeah, very useful 15 minutes for me, especially that.
Lovely, thank you. Is there anybody else in that group who wants to add anything else to what Nick has said? No, well, Carol, I hand over to you for our final few minutes.
Okay, thanks, Fran. Oh, thanks everybody for the feedback that you've just given. Something that I'm not going to promise to facilitate is a database with all the names of all the football players and all of. I can't promise that the research strategy will deliver something like that for you, but you know, one of the things about blue skies thinking and big thinking, particularly in projects and where you're identifying big gaps, is that actually, you know, you might think these things are impossible actually, but I'm a great believer in getting big ideas out on the table, because sometimes even if the idea is too big, you can usually find within that big idea another potential project that can be very important to spin out in research from within collections. And I know there are people in the room who, you know, would probably agree with that, but you've got to have that dialogue and you've got to have that discussion and you've got to get that network in order to be able to share those ideas and see what the art of the possible is really, and to see also where your support can come from as well. Sporting Heritage wants to offer support across the sector to all sorts of sports, people in all different positions in terms of sizes of collections, big and small. And so, you know, I really thank you for taking time out today to be with us and to share some of your thoughts and experiences on research. There is a lot more to do, I know that. So I reiterate that all the inputs that we get today, I'll be going over the chat. I'll be considering everything that's been said and trying to see how that might inform what I put into recommendations for research strategy, but also with people's permission. It might be that I also recontact people who've attended today for one-to-one discussion and input, so that I can get a bit more texture behind some of the ideas and the thoughts that have been inputted today as well. So, and also my email address is at the top of the chat. I'm doing this because it's this side of my screen. If anyone would like to contact me by email, particularly in the next couple of weeks with ideas, suggestions, comments in terms of research, anything really, just drop me an email and let's have a conversation. Let's talk about research. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carol. So I'll draw the session to a close there. Thank you. I'll just reiterate what Carol said. Thank you so much for your time this morning and for all your contributions. As always, I will send a link to this recording and I will save the chat because there's lots of interesting things going on. We almost had parallel conversations, which has been brilliant. So we will share all that chat information and there'll be the usual evaluation link. It'd be really brilliant if you can complete the evaluation for the session, as it helps us program our training program going forwards. So all that remains to say is thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.